All right, so we're diving into trucking today, but with a bit of a twist. We're going to be looking at how a potential Donald Trump presidency could really shake things up for the industry. And, you might be thinking politics and semi-trucks. What's the connection?
Yeah.
Well, we were kind of intrigued, too, especially after seeing this poll from a trucker named Ronan.
Okay.
He runs a YouTube channel called ET Transport.
Right.
And
I've seen that guy, yeah.
yeah, so he asked his audience, and it was over 1,700 truckers. He asked them whether a Trump presidency would be good or bad for the business.
Okay.
And the results were pretty surprising.
What were they?
82% said it would be amazing.
Wow.
Now,
That's a lot.
yeah, and we're not here to endorse any candidate or, predict the future or anything like that.
Right.
But those numbers definitely got our wheels turning.
Yeah.
So we dug into Ronan's video to try to understand what's driving this sentiment.
Yeah, what's behind that?
Yeah, exactly. And it all starts with this idea of deregulation, which is a big theme in his argument.
Gotcha.
He believes that Trump's approach to, scaling back government regulations would be a real game changer for the industry.
Okay, so to really understand the impact here, we need to kind of break down what kind of regulations we're talking about.
Okay.
In trucking, you've got everything from hours of service rules, which dictate how long drivers can be on the road,
Yep.
to ELD mandates for electronic logging devices, to environmental regulations on emissions.
Right.
So Ronan argues that these regulations, while, maybe well-intentioned, they often create unnecessary burdens and costs for truckers.
He uses the analogy of taking the emergency brake off the industry,
Oh, okay.
giving truckers more flexibility and control over their operations.
Interesting.
He even claims that reducing the regulatory burden could lead to higher earnings for drivers.
Now, that's a bold claim.
Yeah.
And while deregulation might sound appealing on the surface, I think it's crucial to consider the potential trade-offs.
Yeah.
For example, are there historical instances where deregulation actually led to, improved safety and working conditions in an industry? Or did it sometimes result in exploitation and, a race to the bottom?
Right.
These are the tough questions we need to grapple with.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
It's not as simple as saying less regulation is automatically good or bad.
Right.
It really depends on the specific context and how those changes are implemented.
Exactly.
But Ronan doesn't stop there. He also sees tax cuts as a major factor in boosting the trucking industry.
Okay.
He actually draws a parallel to the trucking boom we saw during COVID.
Forever.
Remember how the government pumped money into the economy through stimulus checks and increased unemployment benefits?
Yeah.
That led to this surge in consumer spending, and suddenly everyone needed stuff delivered.
Right. Everyone was ordering online.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so Ronan argues that tax cuts under a Trump administration could create a similar ripple effect,
Okay.
putting more money in people's pockets and increasing demand for trucking services.
So kind of stimulating the economy from the bottom up.
Exactly. He even shared a story about how during the peak of the pandemic, trucking rates went through the roof.
Oh, wow.
He said the national average hit $4 a mile
Wow.
compared to the $2.20 or so it is now.
Yeah, that's a huge difference.
It's fascinating to hear how these macro level policies can have such a tangible impact on individual businesses.
Absolutely. But it's also important to remember that economic policies, especially tax cuts, they're complex beasts.
Yeah.
While there's potential for stimulus and growth, there's also the risk of inflation and increased government debt.
Right.
And those effects can ripple through the economy in very unpredictable ways.
So it's like a balancing act, right?
Yeah.
You're trying to stimulate the economy without triggering these unintended consequences.
Exactly. And that brings us to the question for you, the listener. What level of risk are you comfortable with when it comes to economic policy?
Right.
Would you be willing to accept some short-term volatility for the potential of long-term gains?
It's a tough question.
It is.
There's no right or wrong answer.
Right.
But it's definitely something to keep in mind as we explore Ronan's next argument,
Which is?
bringing manufacturing back to the U.S.
Okay.
He's a big proponent of the whole Made in America idea.
Right.
He believes that shifting manufacturing away from overseas and back to the U.S. would create more jobs, boost the economy, and of course generate more demand for domestic trucking.
Okay.
He even points out that this would benefit Canada too,
Oh, interesting.
given how closely our economies are tied together.
That's an interesting point. It's true that the U.S. and Canada have a deeply intertwined trading relationship,
Yeah.
and any major shift in U.S. manufacturing would likely have ripple effects north of the border.
For sure.
However, Ronan's argument does raise some questions about the feasibility and potential downsides of such a dramatic policy shift.
You mean, like, how do you actually convince companies to move their operations back to the U.S. after decades of globalization?
Yeah.
And what about the potential impact on prices for consumers if we're relying more on domestic production?
Exactly. Those are some of the complexities that Ronan doesn't fully address in his video.
Right.
He makes a valid point about the potential for companies to exploit U.S. workers and resources in the current global trade environment,
Yeah.
but he doesn't really delve into the potential consequences of protectionist policies like tariffs.
So it sounds like there's more to this Made in America idea than meets the eye.
Yeah.
Bringing manufacturing back might sound appealing, but it could come with a whole host of economic and political challenges.
For sure. Now let's shift gears and talk about energy independence.
Okay.
Ronan is clearly a fan of Trump's drill baby drill approach to energy policy.
Yes.
He even shared a personal anecdote about how his profit margins increased when fuel prices dropped during Trump's first term.
Wow. So he's speaking from experience.
Yeah, he is.
He makes a compelling case for how lower fuel costs could translate to higher earnings for truckers and potentially even lower prices for consumers.
Right. But as we've seen with other issues, there are always multiple perspectives to consider.
Of course.
While cheaper fuel sounds great, we can't ignore the environmental impact of increased drilling and fossil fuel consumption.
Right.
And of course, there's the broader question of energy security and whether relying heavily on domestic sources is the best long-term strategy.
So it's not just about drilling our way to prosperity.
Right.
We need to think about the environmental consequences and the long-term sustainability of our energy choices.
Exactly. And that brings us to Ronan's final point, which is something that affects everyone, not just truckers.
Okay.
Interest rates and the cost of living.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
He actually gets quite personal here, sharing how his own mortgage payments have almost doubled
Wow.
due to rising interest rates. It's a reminder that these economic indicators aren't just abstract numbers.
Right.
They have a real impact on people's lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a stark reminder that those rising interest rates can put a real strain on household budgets.
Yeah.
Especially for folks with large loans, like mortgages.
And it's not just individuals who are affected, you know.
Right.
Businesses also feel the pinch when interest rates rise, as it becomes more expensive to borrow money for expansion or investment.
Right?
This can have a ripple effect throughout the whole economy,
Yeah.
slowing growth and potentially even leading to job losses.
So it's a complex web of interconnected factors.
It is.
And Ronan sees lowering interest rates as a key part of Trump's economic plan,
Okay.
believing it would put more money back in people's pockets and stimulate spending.
Uh-huh.
He even suggests that Trump is almost on like a mission to bring interest rates down, as if it's like a personal crusade for him.
Okay, but it's important to clarify that presidents don't have direct control over interest rates.
Right.
That power rests with the Federal Reserve,
Right.
which operates independently of the White House.
Right. The Fed has its own set of tools and mandates when it comes to setting monetary policy. But I guess what Ronan is getting at is that a president's policies and actions
Yeah.
can certainly influence the economic conditions that the Fed takes into consideration.
Think of it this way. Imagine the economy as a giant ship.
Okay.
The Fed is the captain steering the ship and adjusting course based on factors like inflation, unemployment, and economic growth. The president, on the other hand, is like the wind,
Okay.
influencing the direction and speed of the ship, but not directly controlling the wheel.
That's a great analogy.
Thanks.
So while Trump might not be able to single-handedly lower interest rates,
Yeah.
his policies could create a more favorable economic environment that would make the Fed more likely to ease monetary policy.
Right. And this is where it becomes crucial for you, the listener, to understand how these complex systems interact.
Yeah.
Because interest rates aren't just numbers on a page. They have a real impact on your personal financial decisions.
Whether you're saving for a down payment on a house, investing in the stock market, or just trying to manage your monthly budget, interest rates play a significant role.
For instance, if you have a variable rate mortgage, a sudden spike in interest rates could significantly increase your monthly payments.
Oh, yeah.
Or if you're thinking about starting a business, higher interest rates could make it more expensive to secure a loan.
So paying attention to interest rates and understanding how you're influenced by various economic factors is a smart move for anyone who wants to be financially savvy.
Absolutely. Now, as we wrap up our exploration of Ronan's perspective on Trump and trucking, it's clear that there are a lot of potential impacts to consider, both positive and negative.
He's obviously passionate about the trucking industry and believes that a Trump presidency would be a net positive for the people who keep those wheels turning.
But as we've discussed, many of these issues are incredibly complex and have ripple effects that extend far beyond the world of 18-wheelers.
It's not a simple black and white situation. There are shades of gray and a lot of nuance to consider.
And that's precisely why we do these deep dives. To help you, the listener, cut through the noise, understand the complexities, and ultimately form your own informed opinions.
And speaking of opinions, we couldn't help but notice the lively debate that erupted in the comments section of Ronan's video.
Yeah, there were some strong opinions in there.
Some viewers wholeheartedly agreed with his assessment, praising Trump's policies and expressing a longing for what they perceived as a more prosperous time for the trucking industry.
Others were more skeptical, raising concerns about the potential downsides of deregulation and questioning the feasibility of some of Trump's proposals.
And of course, there were those who vehemently disagreed with Ronan's viewpoint, arguing that Trump's policies would ultimately harm both the industry and the country as a whole.
It was a real mix of perspectives.
It was, which honestly is exactly what we love to see.
Me too.
It shows that people are engaged, they're thinking critically, and they're not just passively absorbing information.
Precisely, it's a reminder that there are multiple perspectives on every issue, and it's essential to consider a range of viewpoints before forming your own conclusions.
And that, my friend, is the beauty of a deep dive.
Yeah.
It's not about telling you what to think, but rather equipping you with the knowledge and tools to think for yourself.
So as you go about your day, we encourage you to keep these discussions in mind.
Yeah.
What resonates with you? What challenges your assumptions? And most importantly, what questions do you still have?
Because the best deep dives don't end when the episode is over.
Right.
They spark a curiosity that continues to fuel your own exploration and learning.
They encourage you to dig deeper, seek out diverse perspectives, and engage in thoughtful conversations about the issues that matter most.
It's like Ronan threw a rock into a pond, and we're all watching the ripples spread out, touching upon fundamental questions about the role of government, the balance of power, and ultimately what kind of future we want to build together.
No pressure or anything.
Yeah, right.
But seriously, folks, this is why we encourage you to do your own research, listen to diverse perspectives, and engage in thoughtful discussions.
Right.
Because the more informed we all are, the better equipped we'll be to navigate these complex issues and make choices that benefit not just ourselves, but our communities and society as a whole.
So let's circle back to where we started. Remember that 82% of truckers polled by Ronan thought a Trump presidency would be great for the industry.
Yeah.
Well, as we've seen, it's not quite that simple.
Right.
There are valid arguments on both sides of the equation, and the potential outcomes are intertwined with a complex web of economic, political, and social factors.
It's like trying to untangle a giant knot, but that's what makes these deep dives so engaging, right?
Absolutely.
They challenge us to think critically, to question our assumptions, and to embrace the messiness of the real world.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up our exploration today, we want to leave you with a final thought-provoking question.
Okay, hit me.
Given the potential benefits and drawbacks we've discussed, what do you think the ideal balance would be between economic growth and responsible regulation in the trucking industry? It's a question with no easy answers, but it's one worth pondering as we all navigate this ever-evolving landscape.
It's a question that goes beyond just trucking, really.
Yeah.
It touches on the core of how we want our economy to function, how we balance the drive for growth and innovation
Right.
with the need for fairness, sustainability, and the well-being of all stakeholders.
I think that's a great point because ultimately the decisions we make about things like regulation, trade energy policy, they have far-reaching consequences.
They do.
And we all have a role to play in shaping those decisions.
So keep those wheels turning, folks.
Otherwise,
Don't be afraid to challenge your assumptions,
Yeah.
to ask tough questions, and to engage in respectful dialogue with people who hold different viewpoints.
because that's how we learn,
All right.
how we grow, and how we build a better future together.
Absolutely.
And on that note, we'll catch you on our next deep dive. Thanks for listening.